I want you to pull up a memory right now. Just, right this second.
Any memory.
Yeah, but not just a vague recollection, like a really vivid one from your past. Maybe it's the exact moment you walked across the stage at your high school graduation. Or a childhood birthday party where just everything went wrong.
Oh, I have a few of those.
Right. Or even a really heated argument you had with a friend a few years ago. If you focus, you can see the room.
You can probably smell the air, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. You can hear the tone of their voice. And when you do that, it feels incredibly literal, doesn't it? It feels like you are reaching into some dark archive in your brain, finding a specific video file, and just pressing play.
It really does. It feels like a direct recording of reality.
Yeah, and you might admit it's a little grainy, maybe the audio drops out in a few places, but fundamentally, you treat that playback as a faithful, reliable record.
Well, we are going to spend our time today completely dismantling that assumption.
We really are. Because the science of memory tells a radically different story. What if that video file doesn't actually exist? What if almost everything you think you know about your own past, the foundation of who you believe you are, is actually a highly edited, creatively reconstructed fiction?
A fiction that your brain is just making up on the spot.
Yes. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are getting into the cognitive science of memory. And the goal isn't just to learn about the brain. We want to understand the architecture of how your mind builds, destroys, and, entirely fabricates the past.
It is deeply unsettling the first time you really confront that idea.
Oh, totally. Because we rely on our memories to anchor us.
Right, but the moment you stop looking at human memory as a faulty video camera and start analyzing it for what it truly is, which is this relentless, active process of reconstructing reality from scratch, you begin to see the incredible sophistication of the brain.
Your mind is constantly rewriting its own history.
It is an engine of revision. And understanding the mechanics of why it does that and how it physically alters your past, it doesn't just change your relationship with your own history. It entirely changes how you should be operating in the present.
Which is exactly what we're going to look at later, how you can weaponize this science to master learning and protect your own identity. But let's just start with the biggest myth. The video camera.
The archive file.
Right. If my memory of that high school graduation isn't a recording that I'm just loading up, what is actually happening in my brain when I picture it?
To understand that, you really have to look at the sheer biological mechanics of retrieval. Cognitive science and neurobiology have spent, the last half-century, proving that memory isn't a retrieval of a static file.
It's something else entirely.
Yeah, it is an act of real-time reconstruction.
Yeah.
It's an inherently creative process.
Meaning what, exactly?
When you recall that high school graduation, you are not pulling a dusty file folder out of a cabinet. The memory doesn't exist in one neat little location in your brain.
So it's not like, oh, here's the graduation file.
Not at all. The visual details are stored in your occipital lobe. The emotional resonance is tied up near the amygdala. The auditory memory of the graduation music is somewhere else.
Oh, wow. So they're all scattered?
Completely scattered. Every single time you remember the event, your brain is actively firing a network of neurons to rebuild the scene from those scattered, fragmented traces.
And I'm guessing it doesn't always put the pieces back together perfectly?
Exactly. Because it has to rebuild it, it uses inferences, logic, and your current emotional state to just fill in the gaps.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm grasping the physical reality of this. Are you saying that the memory I have of my 10th birthday today is structurally, physically different from the memory I had of that exact same day when I was 20?
It is fundamentally and biologically different.
That is just wild.
It really is. This is because of a process neuroscientists call reconsolidation.
Reconsolidation. Okay.
Yeah. When you recall a memory, the neural pathway that holds those fragments together becomes active. But it also becomes malleable, becomes fluid again.
Like vulnerable to being changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that fluid state, your brain inevitably incorporates new information. It folds in the current context.
Okay, give me an example of how that works.
Let's say you remember your 10th birthday, and your mother recently told you a story about how stressed she was that day. Even if you didn't notice her stress when you were 10, your brain takes that new semantic information.
The fact that she was stressed.
Right. It weaves that new fact into the episodic memory. And when the memory settles back down, when it reconsolidates, it has physically changed.
So it's overwritten.
Completely.
Yeah.
The memory you have today of an event 10 years ago is not the memory you had 5 years ago.
So if I'm picturing this, it's less like opening a PDF. Because a PDF is read-only, right? You open it, you look at the text, you close it. The file remains identical.
That's a good way to look at it.
But if the act of reading the memory makes it fluid and malleable, it's more like opening a Word document.
Yes, exactly.
I open the file, and just by virtue of reading it, my cursor is blinking inside the text. I'm accidentally hitting the spacebar, I'm deleting a comma, I'm pasting in a new sentence my mom just told me.
And when you close the memory, the brain just hits save.
It autosaves over the old file, and there is no version history. I can never access the original draft again.
That is an exceptionally accurate way to visualize reconsolidation. You are perpetually saving over the master file with a slightly updated draft.
That is terrifying.
Well, the most important conceptual hurdle to get over here is that this is not a biological glitch.
Right.
We tend to view this overwriting as a failure of the brain's hardware.
But it isn't.
It isn't. It is the deliberate evolutionary design of the system.
Why in the world would evolution design a system that lies to us about our own past? That seems incredibly dangerous for survival.
You'd think so, but the brain's primary objective is not historical accuracy. The brain is not a historian.
What is it then?
It is a prediction engine. Its entire biological purpose is to keep you alive tomorrow.
Keep you alive tomorrow, okay.
Right. If you think about it from a survival standpoint, a perfectly accurate, static record of the past isn't actually that useful if the environment is changing.
Because the past doesn't perfectly predict the future.
Exactly. The brain needs to take past experiences and constantly update them with new relevant information so that you can navigate future threats more effectively.
So it updates the past to prepare for the future.
Yes. The malleability is a feature, not a bug.
That is fascinating, but it still makes me feel like my own mind is gaslighting me on a daily basis.
Oh, it absolutely is.
It's wild to think about how long it took us to figure this out. The research notes that the scientific study of this doesn't actually start with modern MRI brain scanners. It starts way back in the 1880s.
Which is incredible when you think about it.
It seems impossibly early to be studying the mechanics of memory.
It does seem early, especially because psychology in the late 19th century was still largely intertwined with philosophy. People were debating the nature of the soul rather than running empirical data.
Right, it was all very abstract.
But then you have Hermann Ebbinghaus. He was a German psychologist who essentially invented the systematic empirical study of human memory all by himself.
And because no one had ever done this before, and he didn't have a lab full of undergraduate volunteers, he had to use himself as the sole test subject.
Which is just, well, it's intense.
Well, I read about his methodology, and it sounds like absolute psychological torture. What exactly was he subjecting himself to?
Well, Ebbinghaus realized a fundamental problem with testing memory. If you try to memorize a poem, your prior knowledge of language, emotion, and rhythm gives you an advantage.
It pollutes the data.
Precisely. He wanted to study the pure, raw capacity of the brain to retain and lose new information. So he invented what he called the nonsense syllable.
Nonsense syllables, like fake words.
Basically, they were meaningless three-letter combinations, usually a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant. Words like DAX, BUP, or ZOL.
DAX and BUP, okay.
Yeah. He generated over 2,000 of these meaningless sounds.
Wait, so he just sat in a room in Germany in 1885 staring at lists of DAX and BUP.
For years.
That is unbelievable.
He would sit with a ticking metronome to ensure his reading pace was perfectly standardized, and he would read these lists aloud until he could recite them perfectly from memory.
That sounds mind-numbing.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Then he would painstakingly test his own retention at specific time intervals. 20 minutes later, an hour later, a day, a week, a month.
Just to see how much fell out of his brain.
Exactly. He recorded exactly how many repetitions it took to relearn the list, which gave him a mathematical measurement of how much information had vanished.
And what he found basically set the foundation for everything we know about learning today.
Yes. From this grueling self-experimentation, he derived two foundational rules that remain the absolute bedrock of cognitive psychology.
The first one being the forgetting curve, right?
Yes, the forgetting curve. Before Ebbinghaus, people might have assumed that memory fades at a steady linear rate, a little bit every day.
Just a slow leak.
Right. But Ebbinghaus proved mathematically that memory decay is actually exponential.
Meaning it falls off a cliff almost immediately.
Precisely. The steepest, most catastrophic drop in retention happens in the first 20 minutes to an hour after learning something new.
Within the first hour?
Yes. Within a few days, if you don't reinforce the material, you lose the vast majority of it. And then the curve levels out at a very, very low baseline. The brain aggressively purges new, unreinforced information.
Which brings us to his second massive discovery, how you actually fight that curve.
The spacing effect.
Right.
Ebbinghaus meticulously documented that the timing of when you study matters just as much as how long you study.
Okay, so it's not just about the hours you put in.
No, he discovered that distributing your practice over time produces dramatically better, more durable retention than massing it all together into one session.
Okay, let's put this into a real-world scenario, because this is where my own past makes me cringe.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I have a Spanish exam. Option A, I sit down the night before the test and study for 8 straight hours.
The classic cram session.
Exactly. Option B, I study for just 1 hour a day, spread out over 8 days leading up to the test. It's the exact same 8 hours of total cognitive effort, but the results are completely different.
Completely different. If you do option A, the 8-hour cram session, you will likely pass the test the next morning.
Which reinforces the bad habit.
True. Your short-term retention is temporarily saturated. But because you haven't allowed the neural pathways time to undergo the biological process of consolidation, which primarily happens during sleep over multiple nights, that information is brittle.
So it just breaks apart.
If I test you on that same Spanish vocabulary 3 weeks later, the knowledge will have almost entirely evaporated.
This is literally describing my entire academic career. I was the champion of the 3 a.m. coffee-fueled brute force cram session.
You and millions of others.
Yeah. I'd pass the test at 8 a.m., and by noon, I couldn't tell you a single thing I had studied.
It is the tragedy of modern education. Students are incentivized to pass the immediate assessment, not to build durable knowledge.
But the student who uses option B spacing that exact same 1 hour over 8 days, they are actually changing their brain.
They're working with the brain's biology, not against it. By allowing the memory trace to begin to decay slightly, and then forcing the brain to retrieve and reinforce it the next day, you are signaling to the nervous system that this information is recurrent.
You're telling your brain, hey, this is necessary for survival.
Exactly. The spacing effect isn't a life hack. It is a biological mandate for long-term potentiation, which is the actual physical strengthening of the synapses.
So we have this biological system that aggressively purges data, overwrites its own files, and requires spaced repetition to actually build physical synapses. It just begs the question, where is all this actually happening?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because we use the word memory like it's a singular noun. Like there's a specific hard drive sitting in the center of the skull where all the DAX and BUP syllables and my 10th birthday are stored together.
But the literature makes it very clear that this is a total misconception.
Right. It is perhaps the most important breakthrough in 20th century neuroscience. The realization that memory is not one thing.
No, it is not a single entity or a single location. It is a highly complex, decentralized network of completely different systems.
Like different departments in a company.
That's a great analogy. They operate under entirely different rules, they live in different physical architectures of the brain, and they have completely different vulnerabilities to disease and forgetting.
Let's walk through this architecture, because realizing how compartmentalized the brain is changes everything. Let's start with the big one, the one we've mostly been talking about so far, episodic memory.
Episodic memory is your autobiographical system. It is the memory of what happened to you, when it happened, and where it happened.
It's the story of me.
Yes. It is the only memory system that allows you to consciously engage in mental time travel. When you picture your high school graduation, you are using episodic memory.
And mechanically, where does that happen?
It is initially processed and encoded in a seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain called the hippocampus.
The hippocampus.
You can think of the hippocampus as the master weaver. It takes the visual data from your cortex, the emotional data from the amygdala, and binds them together into a single episode.
But the hippocampus isn't the long-term storage vault, right?
No, it isn't. Over time, particularly during the slow wave phases of sleep, the hippocampus repeatedly replays these neural patterns.
So it's practicing them while we sleep.
Exactly. And by replaying them, it gradually transfers the memory traces out to the neocortex. That's the wrinkly outer layer of the brain for long-term storage.
So the hippocampus is like the loading dock that processes the intake, and it ships the inventory out to the warehouse of the cortex while we sleep.
Perfect way to picture it.
But this episodic system, the personal time travel system, is totally separate from just knowing facts, right? Like, I know the Earth revolves around the sun, but I don't have a vivid autobiographical memory of the specific Tuesday in 3rd grade when my teacher told me that.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second major department, semantic memory.
Semantic memory.
This is your repository for facts, Concepts, definitions, and general knowledge about how the world works. It is abstracted knowledge.
And what is truly remarkable is how cleanly semantic memory can be separated from episodic memory in clinical cases.
Yes, the clinical separation is staggering.
The literature talks heavily about patient HM here, Henry Molaison. This seems to be the case study that really ripped the lid off how these systems are separated. What exactly happened to him?
Henry Molaison is arguably the most important patient in the history of neuroscience. In 1953, he was suffering from debilitating, life-threatening epileptic seizures.
Well, they were just destroying his quality of life.
To try and cure the epilepsy, a surgeon named William Beecher Scoville performed an experimental procedure. He bilaterally removed large portions of HM's medial temporal lobes, which included both of his hippocampi.
They just took the loading docks completely out of his brain.
Yes. The surgery successfully cured the epilepsy, but it left HM with profound anterograde amnesia.
Meaning he couldn't form new memories going forward?
Right. Without a hippocampus, he completely lost the ability to form any new episodic memories. From 1953 until his death in 2008, he lived in a perpetual, rolling present tense.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. You can introduce yourself to him, have a wonderful 20-minute conversation, step out of the room for 3 minutes, and when you return, he would have absolutely no recollection of ever meeting you. His autobiographical timeline just stopped in 1953.
But wait, if his timeline stopped, how does that prove semantic memory is different? Couldn't he just learn nothing at all?
Well, that's where the researchers, particularly Brenda Milner, made their groundbreaking discoveries. They found that while HM could not tell you what he had for breakfast or remember the name of the researcher he had worked with for a decade, he could occasionally learn new semantic facts if they were repeated enough over time.
So facts could somehow bypass the missing loading dock.
A tiny bit, yes. But more profoundly, they discovered the existence of a third, entirely separate department: procedural memory.
Procedural memory, this is the muscle memory, right? Skills.
Yes. Procedural memory governs motor skills, habits, and how to physically perform tasks. Riding a bicycle, tying your shoes, playing a piano, typing on a keyboard.
And this doesn't use the hippocampus at all.
Not at all. It is encoded in entirely different, evolutionarily older physical structures,
Yeah.
primarily the basal ganglia and the cerebellum.
So how did Brenda Milner test this on HM if he couldn't remember anything they asked him to do?
She gave him a task that required procedural learning, specifically drawing a line between two outlines of a star. But the catch was, he could only see his hand and the star in a mirror.
Oh, that's really hard. Everything is backward.
It's highly disorienting and takes practice to master. Over several days, she had HM perform this mirror drawing task. Now, every single day, when she brought the apparatus into the room, HM would say he had never seen it before in his life.
He had zero episodic memory of the prior day's training.
None. But his performance on the task improved dramatically, day by day, exactly like a healthy person.
His hands knew what to do.
His basal ganglia were quietly recording the motor skill, completely bypassing his shattered episodic system. It is a stunning realization. You can physically learn a complex skill while simultaneously having no conscious awareness that you have ever practiced it.
That is just wild to me.
Procedural memory operates entirely below the waterline of consciousness, which is why it is so incredibly robust and resistant to forgetting.
It really paints this picture of the brain as this massive, bustling corporation with all these different departments: the episodic storytellers, the semantic librarians, the procedural mechanics down in the basement.
And they don't even need to talk to each other to function.
Right. But there is one more department that the research highlights, and it seems like it might be the most frustrating one of all. The waiting room, working memory.
Yes, working memory is your mental scratch pad. It is the cognitive system that holds information temporarily in your mind so you can actively manipulate it.
Like doing mental math.
Exactly. Or if I read you a phone number and you have to hold it in your head just long enough to dial it, you are using working memory. And the critical thing to understand is that working memory is the absolute bottleneck of the human mind.
The bottleneck.
Yes. Every single piece of new information, before it can become an episodic story or a semantic fact, must pass through this tiny, highly constrained scratch pad.
Okay, I have to stop here because this is where I realized I've been operating on outdated trivia my whole life.
Oh, the magic number 7.
Yes. Growing up, in every pop psychology article, I was told about the magic number 7. The idea that short-term memory can hold 7 items, plus or minus 2. It was taken as gospel. But the research completely revises that, doesn't it?
It does. The magic number 7 came from a famous 1956 paper by George Miller. It became a cultural phenomenon.
That's wrong.
Well, Modern cognitive psychology, particularly the work of researchers like Nelson Cowan, has demonstrated that when you strip away our ability to group things together or cheat using our long-term memory, the actual biological capacity of the working memory scratchpad is much smaller.
How small?
It is essentially 4 chunks of information.
4. I have a supercomputer in my skull that can render a three-dimensional visual field in real time, but the waiting room for new information only has 4 chairs.
Only 4 chairs.
Why is it so small?
It comes down to the physical limitations of neural firing. To hold an item in working memory, a specific network of neurons in your prefrontal cortex has to fire synchronously and continuously.
They have to actively juggle the information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you try to hold 5, 6, or 7 distinct, unrelated items, the neural networks start to interfere with one another. The frequencies overlap, the signals degrade, and the information collapses.
So 4 distinct representations seem to be the maximum the prefrontal cortex can juggle simultaneously without dropping the balls.
That's the limit.
You know, this explains a profoundly embarrassing daily occurrence for me, and probably everyone listening, the doorway effect.
Oh, the classic doorway effect.
You were sitting in the living room, you realize, oh, I need to cut this tag off my shirt, I need to go to the kitchen to get the scissors. You stand up, you walk down the hall, you cross the threshold into the kitchen, and you just stop dead.
You have no idea why you're in the kitchen.
My mind is completely, utterly blank.
That is the perfect practical demonstration of the 4-chunk limit. Let's look at what is happening cognitively.
Okay.
In the living room, you get the scissors into one of your 4 working memory slots. You begin walking. But as you walk, your environment provides new stimuli.
Right, I'm looking around the house.
You see the dog and realize he needs water. That's slot 2. You feel your phone vibrate with a text message. Slot 3. You remember an email you forgot to send your boss. Slot 4.
All the chairs are full.
And just as you step into the kitchen, the refrigerator hums loudly, grabbing your attention.
And the scissors get kicked out of the chair to make room for the refrigerator hum.
Precisely. The new sensory input overloads the limited capacity, and the oldest or least intensely activated item, the scissors, is simply overwritten. The data is gone.
Okay, so if the brain is constantly purging data, and the ultimate gatekeeper for everything we will ever know or remember is this pathetic 4-slot waiting room, how does anything ever make it to long-term storage?
What's the criteria?
Yeah, what is the actual criteria the brain uses to decide, yes, this is important, ship it to the hippocampus for permanent encoding, versus, whatever, throw it out?
That is the million-dollar question, and it brings us to the encoding formula.
The encoding formula.
Yes. The first and most vital thing to realize is that simply being exposed to information, or even paying attention to it in the moment, is entirely insufficient for encoding.
We've all read a page of a book, paid attention to the words, and gotten to the bottom of the page realizing we have no idea what we just read.
Exactly. For information to force its way through the bottleneck, it requires specific neurochemical triggers. And the most powerful trigger evolution gave us is emotional salience.
Which brings us back to the amygdala.
Correct. The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure situated right next to the hippocampus. You can think of it as the brain's threat detection center and emotional alarm system.
Like a smoke detector.
Exactly. When you experience something highly emotionally charged, whether it is profound fear, intense joy, or deep sorrow, the amygdala activates. And when it fires, it releases a flood of neuromodulators, like norepinephrine, directly into the hippocampus.
So it's chemically shouting at the loading dock.
It is essentially highlighting the incoming sensory data with a neon marker. The amygdala tells the hippocampus, this event made us terrified, or it made us ecstatic. Therefore, this event is highly relevant to our future survival. Do not let this decay. Encode it durably.
This is the biological mechanism behind flashbulb memories.
Yes, exactly.
That makes total sense of my own experience. I can tell you exactly where I was sitting, the texture of the couch I was on, and who I was with when I watched the news of a major historical tragedy unfold years ago.
You remember the details vividly.
But if you ask me what I did on a random, perfectly pleasant Tuesday 3 weeks ago, the file does not exist.
The amygdala didn't fire.
So the hippocampus threw the Tuesday away.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, the mundane Tuesday doesn't help you survive a predator or secure resources. The traumatic or triumphant event does.
Right.
However, this amygdala-driven encoding leads to one of the most critical and widely misunderstood nuances in all of cognitive science, particularly in the realm of psychology and law.
What's the nuance?
The assumption that because an emotional memory is vivid, It must be accurate.
Wait, if the amygdala is specifically highlighting it for survival, shouldn't it be perfectly preserved?
You would think so, but the mechanism is flawed. The intense emotion guarantees that the core of the memory, the central emotionally salient fact, is encoded deeply.
The big picture stuff.
Right. It guarantees that the memory will feel incredibly vivid and intrusive. But the science demonstrates that this high emotional arousal actually narrows your cognitive focus.
Like tunnel vision.
Yes, meaning the peripheral details, the timeline, the exact words spoken, the surrounding environment are poorly encoded and highly subject to the reconsolidation distortion we discussed earlier.
So someone who survives a traumatic event will have a searing, unforgettable memory of the terror, but they might be completely, genuinely wrong about what the attacker was wearing or what time of day it was.
Yes, vividness does not equal truth. It simply means the neurochemical alarm bells were ringing when the trace was formed.
That subjective feeling of certainty we have about emotional memories is often a biological illusion.
A powerful illusion.
That is heavy, and we are going to dive deep into how that gets weaponized in a minute. But before we get to false memories, what if we want to encode something that isn't emotionally terrifying?
Like a spreadsheet.
Yeah. What if I just want to remember a complex concept for my job and my amygdala is completely asleep because it's just boring data? How do I force that through the bottleneck?
You have to bypass the emotional alarm system and use a cognitive strategy called elaborative encoding.
Elaborative encoding, okay.
The principle here is that your brain doesn't like storing isolated, meaningless facts. The working memory will drop them.
It just dumps the DAX and BUP syllables.
Exactly. But if you can connect that new, unfamiliar information to existing, deeply entrenched knowledge already stored in your semantic memory, you drastically increase the likelihood of encoding.
I was trying to visualize how this works physically in the brain, and it feels like building a spider web.
A spider web. I like that.
Let's say I'm trying to memorize a random historical fact, like a date. If I just use rote repetition, staring at a flashcard, and repeating the date over and over, I'm spinning a single thin thread of silk.
Right. It's very weak.
It's incredibly fragile. If that one thread breaks, if that one neural pathway degrades, the memory falls and it's lost forever.
But if you elaborate on it.
Right. If instead of just repeating the date, I pause and ask myself, why did this happen? What other historical event was happening at the exact same time? How does this relate to the book I read last month?
You're making associations.
Now I am spinning connecting threads to anchors that already exist in my brain. I am weaving a spider web. Even if the original direct thread degrades over time, the historical fact is caught in a dozen other structural supports.
That is a phenomenal visualization of neural networking. By asking why and connecting the data, you are literally creating multiple redundant retrieval routes in the cortex.
So there's always another way to find it.
If one synaptic pathway fails, another one can activate the ensemble. This is the physiological reason why truly understanding a concept, building the web, is infinitely more durable than mindlessly repeating it. Meaning is the glue of memory.
And if we want to stress test that web to make the threads thicker, we have to look at the final piece of the encoding formula. We touched on this with Ebbinghaus, but the mechanism of how we practice matters.
You are referring to retrieval practice, also known in the literature as the testing effect.
The testing effect.
It remains one of the most robust yet deeply counterintuitive findings in all of educational psychology. When you observe how the vast majority of people attempt to learn, whether it's students studying for a bar exam or professionals prepping for a presentation, they almost universally engage in passive review.
They reread the textbook, they highlight their notes, they stare at the slides.
Because it feels good.
Right. When you reread a chapter you've already read, your brain recognizes the words and you get this warm, fuzzy feeling of fluency. You think, ah, yes, I know this.
But cognitive science shows that the fluency illusion is a trap. Rereading does very little to strengthen the underlying neural pathway.
It's just surface level.
The science is unequivocal. The single most effective way to strengthen a memory trace is not to try and shove the information back into your head, but to force your brain to pull it out.
You have to test yourself. You have to close the book and stare at a blank wall and try to reconstruct it.
Yes. And the critical mechanism here is the struggle.
The struggle.
When you attempt to retrieve a fact and you strain and you feel that cognitive friction, you are signaling to your brain that this pathway is difficult to traverse but highly necessary.
So the act of retrieval itself is an encoding event.
Yes. Even if you fail to remember it, the sheer biological effort of the attempt primes the neural network. so that when you do look up the answer, the subsequent encoding is vastly stronger than if you had just read it passively.
So the struggle isn't a sign that you are failing to learn. The struggle is the biological mechanism of learning. The cognitive friction is the barbell that builds the muscle.
That's exactly it.
Okay, so we have this picture of how the brain encodes. We know memories are reconstructed, we know they rely on specific systems, and we know they need emotion, connection, or cognitive struggle to survive the bottleneck.
Right.
But here is where the research takes a very dark, very fascinating turn. What happens when the reconstructive, malleable nature of our memory collides with high emotional salience? What happens when our brain's willingness to build a story goes horribly, tragically wrong?
We step into the realm of false memory. And I don't mean simply misremembering where you left your keys.
We're talking about something much bigger.
I am talking about the terrifying ease with which entirely fictional, highly detailed, emotionally devastating memories can be entirely implanted into the minds of normal, psychologically healthy individuals.
It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like a dystopian movie plot. But this isn't theoretical, is it?
Not at all. It is one of the most thoroughly replicated phenomena in cognitive psychology, heavily pioneered by the researcher Elizabeth Loftus in the 1990s.
Her work is legendary.
It completely dismantled the legal and psychological consensus of the era. And she started with a relatively benign but conceptually staggering experiment famously known as the Lost in the Mall study.
Walk me through the mechanics of this study. How do you go about proving that you can implant a fiction into someone's head?
Loftus and her team recruited participants, primarily young adults. But before bringing the participants in, the researchers contacted their older family members, parents or older siblings.
You get some background info.
Right. They asked these family members to provide 3 true, specific memories from the participants' early childhood. But then, the researchers constructed a 4th, entirely fabricated story.
A lie.
A total lie. They wrote a narrative claiming that when the participant was about 5 years old, they got lost in a specific familiar shopping mall for an extended period, were terrified, and were eventually rescued by an elderly person and returned to their family.
And the family members confirmed that this absolutely never happened.
Never happened.
So they have 3 true memories and 1 lie. Then they bring the participant in.
They bring the participant in and present them with a journal containing short prompts of these 4 events. They ask the participant to read the prompts and try to remember as much detail as possible about each one.
And what happens?
Now, in the first session, when they read the Lost in the Mall prompt, most participants do exactly what you would expect. They say, I remember the first 3, but I have no memory of ever getting lost in the mall.
Which is the same response to something that never happened. But they don't stop there.
No. The researchers use a subtle pressure of authority. They tell the participant, that's okay. Sometimes memories are hard to retrieve. Just try to think about it over the next few weeks. Picture the mall. Try to recall it.
They plant the seed.
They brought the participants back for 2 more interviews over the following weeks. And by the end of the study, approximately 25% of the participants had developed a fully formed, vivid, false memory of the event.
1 in 4 people completely fabricated a childhood trauma just because someone in a lab coat suggested it. And from reading the literature, they didn't just passively say, yeah, I guess maybe it happened. They really leaned into it, didn't they?
They absolutely built the web. Remember the reconstructive engine we discussed. Once the seed of the suggestion was planted, their brains went to work. The participants began to elaborate.
Adding details.
They added their own sensory details that were never in the prompt. They described the layout of the mall, the exact feeling of panic in their chest, the physical appearance of the elderly person who rescued them.
They just conjured an elderly person out of thin air.
They wove semantic facts they knew about the mall into an episodic fiction. And the most disturbing part is the subjective experience. They genuinely felt it as real.
Wow.
When the researchers finally debriefed them and explained that the mall memory was a psychological trick, many participants were stunned. Some actually pushed back, insisting that the memory was real and the researchers must be mistaken because they could see it so clearly.
That is deeply unsettling. If you can convince a quarter of healthy adults that they were lost in a mall, what else can you convince them of? Did the research stop there?
It accelerated. Over the following decades, researchers across the globe replicated and escalated this paradigm.
Escalated how?
They successfully implanted memories of participants being involved in severe car accidents, having terrifying encounters with wild animals, undergoing invasive medical procedures, and even committing serious crimes that required police contact.
Wait, they convinced innocent people they committed crimes?
Yes. Using similar suggestive interview techniques over a period of weeks, they convinced healthy adults that they had committed a theft or an assault in their teenage years.
That is horrifying.
The data shows that the success of implanting these false memories correlates heavily with a few specific variables: the vividness of the interviewer's suggestion, the emotional vulnerability of the subject, the passage of time since the supposed event, and crucially, the perceived authority of the person making the suggestion.
Which, if we just pause and think about it, describes the exact environmental dynamics of a police interrogation room. A figure of high authority, a highly stressed and vulnerable subject, and repetitive, suggestive questioning.
Or a courtroom cross-examination.
Right, or in some contexts, a certain type of therapy session.
Exactly. Which is why this research didn't just stay in the lab. It collided violently with the real world, bringing us to a closely related phenomenon Loftus discovered called the misinformation effect.
The misinformation effect.
This looks at how information introduced after an event can retroactively corrupt the original memory trace. And she demonstrated this with the famous car crash study.
I read this in the notes, the smashed versus hit study. I couldn't believe it. Break down the mechanics of how a single word can alter visual reality.
Loftus had participants watch a short film of a multi-car traffic accident. It was a standard, somewhat minor collision. After viewing the film, the participants were divided into different groups and asked a series of questions about what they just saw.
Just a standard questionnaire.
The critical question asked them to estimate the speed of the vehicles. However, the wording was subtly manipulated. One group was asked about how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. Another group was asked about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other.
A single verb. Hit versus smashed.
The linguistic cue changed everything. The group that heard the word smashed estimated significantly higher speeds than the hit group.
That alone shows the power of suggestion.
But the profound discovery came weeks later. The researchers brought the participants back and asked them a new question. Did you see any broken glass in the video?
And just to be clear, there was zero broken glass in the original footage.
None whatsoever. But the participants who had been exposed to the word smash weeks earlier were significantly more likely to confidently report seeing broken glass.
Unbelievable.
Think about the biological mechanics we discussed. When they were asked the question weeks prior, their brain pulled the visual memory of the cars into working memory. It became fluid. The researcher introduced a new semantic concept, smashed.
And smashed implies broken glass.
The brain implicitly associated smashed with severe damage and broken glass. It baked that new assumption into the visual trace, and when it reconsolidated, the broken glass was permanently rendered into the video file.
The brain didn't log the word smashed as a separate comment in the margin. It literally photoshopped the broken glass into the original image, and the participant has no conscious awareness that the edit took place.
It is the ultimate proof that human memory is not evidentiary. And this had massive, catastrophic, real-world implications, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s.
You're talking about the Satanic Panic.
Yes. During this era, there was a widespread cultural and legal phenomenon, alongside a surge in prosecutions for historical child sexual abuse. Many of these criminal cases relied entirely on memories that had been recovered by adults during therapy sessions.
And it is so critical that we approach this carefully because child abuse is a horrific reality, and victims deserve absolute justice. But what the cognitive science revealed about the methods being used to recover those memories is deeply disturbing.
It is one of the most painful intersections of science and society. Many of the therapies popular at the time utilized highly suggestive techniques. Therapists, acting as absolute authority figures, would use guided imagery, hypnosis, and relentless prompting to help patients uncover repressed traumas.
Which is exactly the recipe for a false memory.
We now know with absolute scientific certainty that these are the precise laboratory conditions required to manufacture a false memory. Under the immense pressure of suggestion, patients' reconstructive engines built horrific, vivid fables.
The visualizing abuses that never occurred.
Resulting in families being destroyed and innocent people being sentenced to prison based entirely on confabulated evidence.
It forces you to confront a really chilling reality. You can have two people sitting in a courtroom swearing under oath to two completely different versions of an event, and neither one of them is lying.
No, they aren't committing perjury.
They're both reporting the genuine, vivid truth exactly as their reconstructive biology has built it.
That is the terror and the beauty of the system. The mind is immensely vulnerable.
If our memories are this fragile, if the files are constantly auto-saving over themselves, if a single word can Photoshop broken glass into our minds, and if we can be convinced of traumas that never happened, I mean, it honestly feels like a catastrophic design flaw.
It feels like we're broken.
Yeah, we're walking around with corrupted hard drives. But the research pivots here in a way I did not expect. It suggests that losing this information, that the very act of forgetting, is not a bug in the system. It is a biological superpower.
It is a necessary pivot in our understanding. In daily life, forgetting is universally stigmatized. We view it as a failure of intellect, a sign of aging, or a frustrating inconvenience.
Just a total annoyance.
But neurobiologically, forgetting is an active, highly adaptive, and absolutely essential regulatory process. If you couldn't forget, your mind would collapse.
Why? What is the brain actively trying to achieve by deleting the files?
The primary function is interference reduction. To understand this, think about the sheer volume of mundane data you process. Think about how many times you have parked a car in a grocery store parking lot in your lifetime.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of times.
If your brain retained a perfect, high-definition, permanent episodic memory of every single time you parked, what would happen today when you walked out of the store and tried to remember where your car is right now?
I would have to mentally sort through a thousand different visual memories of the same parking lot to find the one from today.
Precisely. It would be computationally exhausting. The old memories would proactively interfere with the new memory. The noise would drown out the signal.
That makes a lot of sense.
By aggressively forgetting the 999 previous times you parked, your brain clears the mental workspace so that the one relevant memory, where the car is today, can be retrieved instantly. Forgetting lowers the noise so you can hear the music.
I was trying to think of how this feels in the modern world, and the best analogy is the digital hoarder.
Oh, yes.
We all know someone whose email inbox has 45,000 unread messages. They never delete anything. Every piece of spam, every expired 10% off coupon, every newsletter from 2018 is saved right alongside their crucial tax documents and medical records.
Good luck finding the tax documents.
Exactly. If they need to find their passport renewal form quickly, they can't. They are paralyzed by their own archive. Forgetting is essentially the brain's automatic spam filter and decluttering service. It deletes the expired coupon so you can find your passport.
That is exactly what it's doing. And to prove how devastating it is when that spam filter breaks down, cognitive science looks at a very rare clinical condition called hyperthymesia.
Highly superior autobiographical memory.
Yes. The most famous case study is a woman named Jill Price.
She is the woman who remembers absolutely everything, right?
She has an astonishing, almost incomprehensible episodic memory. You can give her a random date, say April 14th, 1998. Within seconds, she can tell you what day of the week it was, what the weather was like, what she had for lunch, what outfit she was wearing, and what was on the evening news.
Wow.
Her brain does not purge episodic data.
See, to a normal person who constantly forgets their passwords, that sounds like a comic book superpower. I would love to have that for a week.
Many people think that, until they hear her describe her actual internal experience. Jill Price does not describe her memory as a gift. She describes it as a profound, exhausting burden.
Really?
Because she cannot forget, she has no control over her retrieval cues. If a smell or a word triggers a memory from 20 years ago, she is instantly flooded with the high-definition sights, sounds, and intense emotional reality of that moment.
So she's just constantly reliving things involuntarily.
The past constantly intrudes on her present. She is mentally yanked backward in time hundreds of times a day, making it incredibly difficult to just exist peacefully in the present moment.
So the ability to forget the past is literally what allows us to live in the present. That is profound. But forgetting isn't just about keeping us sane by reducing the noise. It's actually the mechanism that makes us smart, isn't it? The literature talks about how forgetting allows episodic memory to transform into semantic memory.
Yes, this is the process of generalization and abstraction, and I would argue it is the most beautiful cognitive mechanism the brain possesses.
How does that work?
Let's look at how a toddler learns. Imagine a young child trying to learn the concept of a dog. Over a few months, they encounter a golden retriever, a tiny poodle, and a massive bulldog.
3 very different looking animals.
Now, if the child's brain retained every single specific episodic detail of those encounters, the exact wiry texture of the poodle's fur, the specific angle of the bulldog's underbite, the precise color of the retriever's collar, the child will be completely overwhelmed by the
I
differences.
wouldn't be able to see the forest for the trees. The bulldog and the poodle are so physically different. If you only focus on the specific details, they don't look like the same animal.
Exactly. So how does the brain solve this? It uses forgetting as a tool.
It deletes the details.
Over time, the brain actively strips away the hyperspecific episodic details of the individual dogs. It blurs the edges. It deletes the memory of the collar and the specific fur texture,
Hmm.
and what is left behind when you strip away the specifics.
The general pattern. 4 legs, a snout, a tail, a bark.
The concept. By actively forgetting the specifics of experience, the brain extracts the underlying semantic truth. This is how episodic experience is converted into semantic knowledge.
That is just incredible.
Forgetting is the chisel that sculpts the statue of knowledge out of the raw block of experience. If we couldn't blur the details, we could never spot the broader patterns of the world. Therefore, forgetting is the very physiological mechanism of human wisdom.
Forgetting is the mechanism of wisdom. That completely reframes how I view my own mind. But there is one more type of forgetting mentioned, and this one feels a bit more intentional. Does the brain ever hide things from us on purpose? Not just to build concepts, but to protect us.
Yes, cognitive psychology recognizes the phenomenon called motivated forgetting. And this is heavily supported by modern neuroimaging, particularly the directed forgetting experiments conducted by researchers like Michael Anderson.
Motivated forgetting.
The brain has the capacity to actively suppress memories that are cognitively disruptive or emotionally aversive.
When you say suppress, my mind immediately goes to Sigmund Freud. Is this Freudian repression, shoving our dark traumas into the unconscious mind where they secretly control our behavior?
It is crucial to separate the modern science from the Freudian psychoanalytic concept. Freud posited a complex, unconscious defense mechanism hiding traumatic secrets.
Right, the whole hidden vault idea.
Motivated forgetting, as we understand it neurologically today, is a much more mundane, observable executive control process. It works very much like stopping a physical action.
Like stopping yourself from dropping a glass.
Or if you go to reach for a hot stove, your brain can send an inhibitory signal to stop your arm. Similarly, if an environment triggers a memory that is painful or highly distracting, your prefrontal cortex can send active inhibitory signals down to the hippocampus to dampen the retrieval of that specific pathway.
So it's not a magical vault of secrets. It's just the brain putting up a neurological roadblock on a specific street because driving down that street causes too much pain.
Exactly. It weakens the synaptic pathway through intentional disuse. It is an active daily management of your mental state to keep you functioning.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the whole picture we've painted today. We rely on this tiny 4-chunk working memory to filter the world. We aggressively delete the vast majority of our lives to reduce noise. We abstract the rest to gain wisdom.
And the few vivid memories we do keep are constantly reconstructed.
Right. They're edited and vulnerable to total fabrication. If our entire past is built on this foundation of glitchy, heavily edited fictions, what does that mean for who we actually are?
This is where cognitive science necessarily intersects with philosophy. When we trace all these biological mechanisms to their logical conclusion, we arrive at the question of personal identity.
Who am I, really?
Memory is not just a utilitarian tool we use to find our car keys or pass a Spanish test. Memory is the very substrate of the self. It is the only continuous thread that knits together the person you were yesterday, the person you are right now, and the person you intend to be tomorrow.
Which brings us right back to the tragedy of patient HM, the man without a hippocampus.
Yes. Henry Molaison lived for half a century without the ability to form episodic memories. He was intelligent, he was capable of holding a conversation, he retained his semantic knowledge from before 1953, and he was known to be incredibly kind.
But because he could not accumulate new experiences, he was marooned in time. He could not build a narrative.
It highlights a profound truth.
Yeah.
To have an intention for tomorrow, you must have a memory of yesterday. The cognitive systems we use to remember the past are the exact same neural networks we use to imagine the future.
Wow. So they use the same hardware.
Without episodic memory, you cannot project yourself forward in time. You cannot say, I made a mistake yesterday, so I will act differently tomorrow.
Yeah.
Therefore, the self is not a static object in the brain.
What is it?
The self is a narrative. It is a story we tell ourselves about who we are, constructed entirely from the raw materials of our memory. When you severely impair the memory system, you don't just lose data, you suffer a profound disruption of selfhood.
This makes me think of the incredibly painful reality of aging, specifically diseases like Alzheimer's and various forms of dementia.
It explains why it is so devastating for families.
When you watch a loved one slowly lose their autobiographical memory, the tragic refrain you always hear from the family is, they are just not the same person anymore. And biologically, narratively, that is true. The physical body is sitting right in front of you, the heart is beating, but because the narrative thread has unraveled, the person seems to vanish.
It is the cruelest theft of the disease, because if the narrative unravels, the identity dissolves. We are entirely dependent on the continuity of our memories to exist as individuals.
So I want to pose a question to everyone listening. It's a quiet, maybe slightly dizzying thought to mull over. If our identities are just narratives built on memories, and we have spent this entire deep dive establishing that those memories are constantly edited, heavily reconstructed, deeply flawed fictions, does that mean the self you think you are is really just a story you are constantly rewriting?
That is the ultimate implication. We are the authors of our own continuity, and we are writing with an incredibly imperfect, ever-changing pen.
It is beautiful and a little terrifying, but I want to step back from the existential ledge for our final section, because understanding how this reconstructive, filtering, glitchy engine works isn't just for philosophical pondering.
No, it is intensely practical.
How can we take this profound biological understanding of the brain and actually use it to our advantage? Specifically, if I want to master a new skill or learn a language, how do I hack this system?
If you apply the biological rules we've discussed, the applications for complex learning like acquiring a new language are revolutionary. Let's start with the spacing effect.
Okay, Ebbinghouse's rule.
Right. We know that massing practice is useless for long-term potentiation. So if you want to learn Spanish vocabulary, you must space your retrieval.
And practically, how do people do that without keeping a massive, complicated spreadsheet of when they last looked at a flashcard?
This is where modern software has caught up with Ebbinghaus. The most effective tool is spaced repetition software, with Anki being the most prominent example.
I've heard of Anki.
The software uses an algorithm designed to perfectly mirror the human forgetting curve. You learn a new word today, the software tests you tomorrow. If you retrieve it easily, the algorithm knows the synapse is strong, so it waits 3 days before showing it to you again, then a week, then a month.
It schedules the test right at the exact moment the memory is about to fall off the cliff.
Precisely. It forces your brain to retrieve the information just as the trace is degrading. That specific timing signals the amygdala and hippocampus that this data is persistently vital for survival, cementing it into long-term storage with maximum efficiency.
But the spacing software only works if we combine it with the second rule, the testing effect.
Yes. How you use the flashcard matters. If the app shows you the Spanish word and you flip it over to see the English word and just nod to yourself, you're falling for the fluency illusion.
You think you know it, but you don't.
You are not learning. When the prompt appears, you must stop, look away, and struggle to recall the answer. You must embrace the cognitive friction. Even if you get it wrong, that failed retrieval attempt physically primes the neural network so that when you finally do look at the correct answer, the encoding is vastly deeper.
I love this because there is such a beautiful irony to it. In our society, in traditional schooling, we view struggling to remember as a sign of stupidity.
You really do.
We feel embarrassed when we are put on the spot and can't pull up a word. We think our brain is failing. But neuroscientifically, that uncomfortable feeling of struggle is the exact physiological process of building a permanent memory.
Effortful retrieval is the angle on which durable memories are forged. You have to seek out the struggle. And finally, you must use elaborative encoding.
The spider web.
Yes. If you are learning a language, do not just learn isolated word lists. Your working memory will drop them. You must build the web.
So learn vocabulary in context.
Yes. Embed the new word in a funny sentence. Connect it to an episodic memory from your own life. Tie it to an emotional state. By anchoring this semantic fact in a rich context, you create dozens of associative neural pathways.
But there is a massive warning label attached to this learning process in the research, isn't there? A dark side to procedural memory when it comes to learning. The misinformation effect doesn't just apply to car crashes, it applies to grammar.
Ah, yes. This is a very specific, very frustrating obstacle for language learners, often referred to as fossilization.
Fossilization.
Think about what happens when a learner repeatedly makes a grammatical error. Let's say a non-native English speaker consistently says, I am agree, instead of I agree.
You hear that one constantly in language exchanges.
Now, why does that mistake stick? because when they say "I am agree," the listener usually understands them and continues the conversation.
They get their point across.
Exactly. The learner receives positive reinforcement, the communication was successful, but
Yeah.
because they are physically speaking the error repeatedly, it bypasses the semantic memory and becomes encoded as a motor habit in the basal ganglia.
It becomes a procedural memory.
Yeah.
It's like paving a dirt road in the wrong direction. Every time you say, I am agree, and the person nods, you run a steamroller over that neural pathway, laying down another thick layer of asphalt on the wrong road.
That is exactly what is happening structurally in the nervous system.
Mhm.
The error becomes automatic. And the devastating part is that unlearning that practiced error is exponentially harder than learning a brand new rule from scratch.
Because you don't just have an empty field to build a new road on.
Exactly. You now have a powerful, established, automatic false memory in your basal ganglia actively competing with the correct grammatical form you are trying to learn in your cortex.
The old road is fighting the new road.
When you go to speak, the heavy-duty asphalt road of the error is much faster than the new, fragile dirt path of the correct rule. You literally have to engage inhibitory networks to tear up the old road while simultaneously trying to build the new one.
It is incredibly computationally exhausting.
It highlights how immensely careful we must be with the input and practice we feed our brains.
It is a profound reminder that our brains will obediently build whatever we practice, whether it is true or false, right or wrong. Well, we have covered some truly staggering ground in this hour.
We really have.
We started by destroying the myth of the video camera, realizing that our minds are reconstructive storytellers, constantly hitting save over the master file, slightly altering our history every time we remember it.
We mapped the architecture of the brain, separating the episodic time travelers, the semantic librarians, and the procedural mechanics, all constrained by the tiny bottleneck of our four-chunk working memory.
We looked at the neurochemistry of how the amygdala highlights memories for survival, and explored the terrifying fragility of the system. How Elizabeth Loftus proved that a single verb can Photoshop a memory, and how entirely false traumas can be implanted through the power of suggestion.
We completely reframed the concept of forgetting, elevating it from a biological failure to a superpower that reduces interference, grants us the wisdom of abstraction, and protects our emotional equilibrium.
We stood on the philosophical edge, recognizing that our very identity, our sense of self, is entirely dependent on the continuity of these fragile, heavily edited narratives. And finally, we looked at the ultimate playbook for mastering learning.
Embracing the struggle of testing, spacing out our retrieval, and carefully building webs of context.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. An extrapolation of everything we have just discussed applied to the way we live right now.
Oh, this is a big one.
If our episodic memory evolved over millions of years to be a muscle and active biological engine that reconstructs the past to prepare us for the future, a muscle that intentionally filters and forgets so we can generalize and stay sane, what happens to human identity when we stop using that muscle?
When we outsource it.
Exactly. Today, we are actively outsourcing our memories to the cloud. Our smartphones perfectly record every photo, every argument via text message, every single GPS location we visit. We have instant, flawless digital video files at our fingertip.
We don't have to reconstruct anything anymore.
If we increasingly rely on those perfectly accurate external digital records instead of our brain's messy reconstructive storytelling, are we allowing the biological engine of meaning to atrophy? Are we at risk of losing the very cognitive process that helps us weave the narrative of who we actually are?
It is the defining cognitive question of our era. If the self is a story, what happens when we let a hard drive tell it?
Something to think about the next time you reach into your pocket to document a moment instead of just living it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you and definitely keep questioning your own past.